Hello and welcome to episode 10 of Destroy Before Listening, which is a conversation between myself, Pete Byrne and Andrew Nolan. I've been familiar with Andrew's band since seeing Ebola and Swanov play at lots of early hardcore gigs in the mid-90s. His early background in pirate radio in Leeds also gave him exposure to hip-hop, which has now come full circle 30 years later with the project Wolfagram. This is the name he goes by for hip-hop production, which is another expression of his prolific output. The conversation discusses his time and experiences in early 90s Newcastle, from forming bands to then joining Ebola, who went on to tour more widely in Europe. On moving to Glasgow in the later half of the 90s, he formed the band Shank, who then managed to play as far afield as Australia and America. Around the same time, he was also producing noise and experimental work as Joshua Norton Cabal. This came from his early love of strange sounds in the tape trading scene. In 2003, he moved to Toronto, Canada, where he quickly formed The-Endless-Blockade, recording a demo in 2004. That band ran until 2011, when he then went on to form Column of Heaven. Both groups crossed a number of genres, such as hardcore, power violence, grindcore, death metal, industrial and noise. After that group's ending, Intensive Care began and they've been active since 2016. Working as a two-piece has provided more flexibility as a band with regard to DIY recording and their freedom in the music produced. You can follow on Instagram at Destroy Before Listening, where photos are posted relating to each episode. Please subscribe and share this to anyone who may be interested. Getting the word out is always appreciated. Thank you. Your background is in Leeds pirate radio and underground club culture. Just to kind of frame that a bit more, really, because in that kind of I don't know how that transitioned into hardcore and DIY.
Yeah, I grew up in Leeds, and in the throughout the 80s and part of the 90s, very much involved in a huge fan of hip hop. And a lot of underground club culture, I guess what it would have been called the rave scene at the time, acid house in the late 80s, and then a lot of the jungle nights in the early 90s. My interest in how we got started and all that stuff was there was just a group of us, and we're all fanatical about the music and the culture around it. And to us, music was not just a record you would buy and the music you would listen to. There was a distinctive cultural context around it, and I still feel the same way. So it was natural to us that because we were so into it that we were also interested in the cultural aspect of it as well. And we set up a pirate radio station when we were 15 for a few months before the state kicked the door and took all the equipment off us. But yeah, we did that for a few months. I was 15 years old in Leeds, and then we would just be going to various underground illegal squatted clubs and that kind of stuff. And that was really my introduction to this. So I guess how that transitions into the world of DIY is that it wasn't that much of a stretch to do it, because my association with music and my interest in music was that it was a distinctive culture and a context and a social framework that you were involved in, and the music was just happened to be a part of that. And the DIY scene, particularly of the late 80s and the 90s, was fit right in with that. The music was different, but I think some of the social relationships and the way that you navigated the world was the same. So yeah, that was my roots, and I think that gave me a good grounding in squats and autonomous venues and DIY distribution and that kind of stuff later on.
What year was this?
The radio, that was 1988. I was 15. I was born in 1973. So it was 88. Actually, it might have even been 1989. It's funny, I was looking at the Instagram of a couple of guys that did that station with me, and one of them said it was 87, but I don't. It wasn't 87. I think I was too young. I was too young to be doing it in 87. It was probably 88, possibly 89.
Was it a bedroom thing then, or just someone else's house?
there was a huge pirate radio scene in the country at the time, and especially in Leeds. There was like lots of different radio stations. I'm drawing a blank on them now. Dream FM, ABC, I think MCR, PCR was over in Bradford, but they were huge pirate radio scene, and in Yorkshire in particular. I'm sure it was the same in other parts of the country, but in Yorkshire in particular, it was like an outgrowth of the Caribbean sound system culture. So it was a lot of like reggae and West Indian music, and you'd also hear hip hop and stuff on it. And most of the pirate radio stations would mostly doing soul and reggae, and would occasionally do some hip hop. But we wanted to do something a bit more in our interest, so we just did solely hip hop and like acid house on the pirate radio station. So yeah, that's what the culture was at the time. There's a lot of stuff going on then.
Yeah.
And we did it in we found some guy who was an older guy, slightly criminally oriented, let's say.
Yeah.
And we did it in the back bedroom of his small flat in Leeds in Chapel Allen. And I don't remember how we hooked up with that guy, but yeah, he was a sketchy older guy.
Mm-hmm.
In my head, he felt like he was about 100 years old. He was probably actually only about 25 now that I think about it, because, age gaps at the time seemed phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
They don't quite seem quite so phenomenal now.
What like equipment did he need, or did we using to broadcast?
So you needed an antenna and you needed a transmitter was the basic things. I mean, you're asking me to go back in time now, and I wasn't the technical person. There was in our group of friends. There was a couple of like real electronics nerds who went on to build things like synthesizers for Chris Carter from Throbbing Gristle, and a specialized camera systems for the BBC. It turns out I won't name him, but he was our technical guy, and so we had a transmitter, and then you basically just ran your mixer into your amp. The turntables on the mixer, and then the amp went into the transmitter. The smarter way to do it, though, was to have a relay system. You would have, so the more professionally organized pirate radio stations, they'll be in tower blocks, and in one block would be the broadcasting, and then the other block would be the studio, and you would have a short-range transmitter in the studio that would send the signal to the booster in the other building. And the reason they did that was so when the police would raid the buildings, they raid the studio, what they're actually raiding is they're raiding the dummy transmission site, and the studio is in another building, so they don't have so they track the signal. They track the signal to this apartment building, this block of flats, but they don't get the studio, which is in a different building, because they don't have a warrant to enter the premises there. So the people will be able to see them going into the studio across the other block of flats, and then stop broadcasting, and then you just lose the transmitter, but you don't lose your entire studio. That was how the more professional people did it.
Yeah.
We didn't. We just had an aerial on a roof and a transmitter, which is why we only lasted a couple of months.
It sounds pretty archaic now, doesn't it?
I mean, it does now, because everyone just does podcasts now. At the time, it was like this. One, it was completely illegal, and two, it was just a phenomenal amount of effort to do it. And you would just you broadcast on a frequency and hope people were listening, and people would. It was weird, the radio had much more of a draw then than it does now. But I don't know, different times.
Yeah. So would it be right in thinking that it was your later teens when you got more into like metal and hardcore punk?
Yeah. Yes, it was. Probably like metal and hardcore. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't make that much of a distinction, because it was all
extreme music.
I hate that expression. I hate that expression.
Extreme.
There's this Morbid Angel t-shirt. I hate back print on t-shirts, but Morbid Angel had this t-shirt that says extreme music for extreme people. And I remember once Stiff, who played bass in a short-lived band I was in, Nation of Finks, once saw that t-shirt and was like, extremely music, what does that mean? So anytime I hear extreme music, I just think extremely music. I only ever really separated genres in terms of my own output, in terms of my listening habits. I never really separated genre particularly. But yeah, I started listening to what I would nowadays call angry men with guitars music. I started listening to more sort of angry guitar music in my late teens, and that was. I mean, that's a story that I think pretty much most people share who are of my age. It was listening to John Peel. Because John Peel would play hip hop, so you'd listen, and as time went on, you played less and less hip hop. So you'd listen to a 2-hour show, and you might hear like one song, and you'd hear a lot of stuff that you're like, God, this is absolutely awful music. What is this? But then you start picking up on stuff, and then the next thing you know, you're 18 years old and going to see Extreme Noise Terror play at the Duchess of York in Leeds, like I was, and that was kind of my route into different avenues of like musical expression was definitely very much through John Peel. And also, weirdly, reading Class War as well, because I used to read Class War when I was a teenager, and they would sometimes have music in it, and I would look up the bands on it, and I remember buying a Doom record, the band, not the genre.
Did they do like reviews in there?
I don't even remember. There was a mention to Police Bastard, the Doom song, and I was like, what the hell is this? This sounds insane. And I bought it from Jumbo Records. I don't remember which Doom record it was. It might have been the split album with No Security or Peaceville, but it was one of the Doom records. And I bought that because it was in Class War, and I was just like, I need to know what this is. Like, this just seems so bizarre to me that there's a band that has a song called Police Bastard, and that this crazy newspaper, anarchist newspaper, Class War, is talking about this music. So I think they would, like, you know, when people do benefit tapes, which was a big thing back in the like 80s and 90s, I think they would mention when there was benefit tapes for Class War. So you'd see all these band names and what the hell is this? This makes no sense to me. So I had to know more about it. So yeah, so John Peel and Class War kind of opened me up to like a lot of punk and hardcore and metal stuff.
When did you decide that you pick up an instrument, or it was specifically the bass?
18. I was 18. I got a bass with my younger brother played guitar already, and he had a bass, and I would just pick him up and just like make noises on him. And then eventually I asked my parents to buy me a bass, and they did. And he was making like weird music. I say weird music because it just was weird music with friends. Like we had like some old analog keyboards. I had a Roland SH-101 when I was like 16, 17, and a friend of mine had a Juno 6 and a couple of turntables, and then we had one of those Casio SK5 keyboards, which had like a 2.5 seconds of sampling time, and you could fart into the microphone on it, and then you've got 4 pads and you can play it, and we would just we would just make just bizarre. I say bizarre music because we didn't know what we were doing, so we would just make weird. It's like, screeching. It wasn't noise, but it was, like screeching oscillators and like break beats that he would play on his turntables, and just like weird. We'd make prank phone calls, and we would use those on it, and just being kids, making weird sounds. And then, but to actually be serious about music was something I didn't really know how to do, and making hip hop and stuff was a much more complicated thing, and I didn't know how to do it. And there wasn't old man time, there wasn't YouTube to look at and get a tutorial on how to do it, which there is now. So I didn't know what equipment to get, didn't know how to get it, wouldn't have known how to use it. So I bought a bass because I figured it was easier. Because because the other stuff was too complex. And also, like, I know we're going to get into this, but I lived in the West End of Newcastle throughout the early to mid 90s. And the West End of Newcastle, for people who don't know, was an incredibly rough place at the time. I'm sure it's not all fun and games now, but it was like one of the burglary capitals of the UK. And you don't want to have an Akai MPC sampler and have some little Ned kick your door in and steal all your stuff. It's like irreplaceable. So having a bass was the easier option for me when I was younger.
Yeah, right. So you would have moved to Newcastle in the early 90s, would that be right?
Yeah, 92.
92. This is to go
yeah.
to school, to university or whatever.
School, yeah. So I went to Trent to be a psychiatric nurse. So yeah, I went up to Newcastle, studied, became a psychiatric nurse, which I'm not anymore, but I was for a few years. Yeah, so that's why I ended up in Newcastle, and it was the rite of passage at the time that you would leave home, go away, as most people did, and I did it because I went to school.
What did you see? Being in Leeds, what did you see in Newcastle as a town or somewhere that you'd want to go to?
God, I don't know. I think one, I wanted to stay in the north, and two, I think what I remember is that I think on the application you had to pick your three first choices, and you had to write a code. And I think I wrote the wrong code. I meant to write Sheffield. I put Newcastle by mistake. And Newcastle offered me, so I was like, "No, fuck it, I'm going to go to Newcastle." So I don't know. I just wanted to stay in the north. I didn't need to be close to my family. It wasn't like, I need to be close to home. It really wasn't. And Newcastle and Leeds are not that far apart, but certainly felt like it was a distance. But yeah, I just wanted to be in the north.
Yeah. So arriving in Newcastle, and how quickly did you become acquainted with like a scene that you found to be like, home, something that worked or something that like sounded good?
Social scene very quickly. You find out what's going on, and there was used to go to various nights at Newcastle Polytechnic at the time, and Newcastle University had a few nights. I can't remember what they were called. I think one of them was called Bulletproof. I don't even remember.
Yeah, Bulletproof. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even think that was one of the ones that was at one of the universities. But you just go to those, and then you would meet people there, and then this was the time when you have green hair, I have green hair. Let's become friends, so that when we're together on the street, we're less likely to get kicked to death by strangers.
Yeah.
And that's that was how you kind of met people, and it was partly a survival thing. But yeah, that was a social circle. A scene itself, like I don't know. Like I met other people, and we shared musical tastes, and then like I got friendly with Dickie, that was a singer in Sawn Off, Needlestick with me, and Chrissy, who played drums, and we used to knock about. And then gradually, you just meet different people, and I met the people who I met Graham Jackson, who used to do Heat the Ball gigs in a distro, and I used to start knocking about with them. I met more like anarchists and politically minded punks as well. And it felt like that was kind of a bit of a long stretch between all of those stuff meeting up, but I think they happened quite quickly now that I think back about it. So yeah, it went from like a social circle to then, your social circles start to interact and intertwine with other people that were doing things at the time. And then met Mickey and Karen, who were in One by One at the time, and then we started doing Ebola.
Because this was, it's a sort of amalgamation of three bands or whatever, would you say at the start? Because it's like Needlestick, Sawn Off, and Spite, which was the sort of I suppose, very formative version of Ebola.
Yes. I mean, Spite was Ebola. We just changed the name because I think we played 2 gigs as Spite in Belgium. I can't remember the timeline. The timeline is a little fuzzy, I got to say, for that part of my life now.
Yeah.
We were called Spite originally, but the other Spite from Bristol, which was members of, I don't remember what band it was. Was it someone from Ripcord in the band?
Can't remember. Something like that, yeah. I remember a band being called Spite, yeah.
But they happened at the same time as us. Someone was like, "Oh, damn!" And they actually started recording, putting that music before we did. So we were like, "Okay, we'll just change the name." So Spite was Ebola. Needlestick, Sawn Off is in my brain was the same band as well. And just to contextualize it for people who are listening, so Needlestick was my very first band. We did a terrible demo and a less terrible but not very good 7-inch, and then we figured out what we were doing a bit more, and we changed the name to Sawn Off, and we added a couple of members. So we added a second guitarist, that was Ash, that was playing in Embittered before, and Scalesy, that used to sing in Mortal Terror, the old Newcastle sort of crusty band from the 80s, and was in Critical Mess, who were a weird kind of Hawkwind meets sort of Discharge meets Anti-Sect kind of band that were doing the rounds at the time. So Sawn Off and Needlestick were the same band in my brain. We just got serious, so we changed the name in the same way that, Spike. I'd forgotten that Spike was the original band name for Ebola. So those were the two bands that I was doing, and initially we shared a drummer, like Chris Patterson played in Sawn Off and Ebola on drums.
Yeah. I've got to ask you as well, it's like kind of John Lobster's part in the Ebola, and like you obviously met him pretty earlier on in Newcastle.
Yeah. Jonathan Shaw, or Lobster as he was known at the time, because he used to wear a plastic lobster around his neck.
Yeah.
He used to work for Norgas, and he would tell me that when he was caught, because part of his job was doing like cold calls to people, and like you just get bored, and he would just start like making stuff up. And I remember like if he used to get an answering machine, he would leave like weird messages. So he'd pretend to be from Customs and Excise and be leaving messages about people smuggling in illegal monkeys into the country. Because he was just bored. Yeah, Lobster.
Right. So early Ebola is like John Lobster on vocals as well with Karen. This is pretty early on, isn't it? Because I remember seeing the band, like it must have been, a couple of gigs in, because they still had people still had the lyric sheets with the.
Oh my God! Yes.
Yeah.
I think Nick Loring, who sang after Jonathan, I think he had lyric sheets on stage with them the whole time on that Los Crudos tour, or the first half of it at least. Jonathan Shaw, Johnny Lobster, and his Plastic Lobsters, very strange person. Him and I were, and Jonathan died in the mid 2000s tragically. But yeah, we were very close. We were like really, really close friends. We lived together. We hit it off. Like almost immediately when we started hanging out. I think we were both kind of kindred spirits in a lot of ways. But yeah, we wanted to do bands, and he'd been in a bunch of bands. He'd done some band called Rigotortus, and then I can't remember the other band he was in. It was some like Discharge kind of band. He played bass in that. I think he did vocals in Rigotortus. I can't remember though. But we were talking about doing a new band together, and introduce him to like stuff like Infest and Man as the Bastard and Drop Dead and Spaz and those kind of bands. And we really wanted to do a band together, so we would just, when you were kids in those days, you would just get drunk in the park and talk about your plans for world domination with music. But we talked about doing it, and then I met Mickey and Karen. I don't remember how, to be honest, but would go over and see them over in the other side of the city. Would go visit them and bring music over, and go, hey, have you had this Charles Bronson record? And they would play me stuff I'd never heard of. And then we talked about doing a band with Mickey and Karen, and I was like, it was a time when everyone had two vocalists in a band, so I was like, well, Jonathan wants to do a band as well, let's have him. And we just for drummers, Chris, who was drumming in Sawn Off at the time, to play. So yeah, it was a few different social worlds colliding, doing that band, and then through being in Ebola, that opened up my connections, which I didn't have before, into a much bigger European-wide network of stuff through Flat Earth Records. So going on tour in Europe and meeting people particularly in Belgium and parts of Germany, Potsdam and Leipzig, and using those networks and understanding a bit more how music worked on more than just a local level. So that was where that all came from, Ebola. Now, Ebola was, I don't know what the time frame is. So Needlestick started in 92, maybe 93, and became Sawn Off, I think, in about 94. And I think Ebola started in 94, but it might have been 95. And then the first 2 gigs we did were in Belgium, and I think we were called Spite then, now that I think about it, you jog my memory. And then we released an album. It was the first thing we released. It was Ebola. And I left that band in, I want to say 99.
Well, the band after Ebola was Shank, wasn't it? When you were in Glasgow, or went to live in Glasgow?
Yeah, I moved to Glasgow in 96, and I was doing Shank and Ebola at the same time briefly, because that was what I used to do at the time for some stupid reason. That was my local band I was in, but I was still traveling back and forth to Newcastle and sometimes Bradford to do Ebola. But I had a local band up in Glasgow, and we just started doing Shank, and it could happen quite quickly because I'd already kind of dipped my toes in the water with the sort of European larger network of stuff. So it wasn't just a case of like play a bunch of local gigs and then record endless demos. We were pretty much up and running quite quickly because the connections were there. So it wasn't like starting from scratch. But I moved to Glasgow in 96. So I was in Newcastle 92, 96, and Glasgow 96 to 2003, and then I've been in Toronto, Canada since then.
I was going to ask about the Joshua Norton Cabal stuff. When was the decision for deliberately making noise, as opposed to just it happening? When you had an idea or better idea or influences towards making it.
Joshua Norton Cabal was the noise project I did for quite a long time. And I was making some weird noises in Newcastle. I did very briefly did a thing called Nihilism for Beginners with Andy from Critical Mass playing Moog, and Conrad, who wasn't in any other bands, doing stuff on a computer, which was weird in the mid-90s because it was on like a giant tower computer, and I would play bass and do some noise stuff. Did that for a while, but it wasn't until I moved to Glasgow I actually started figuring out the possibilities of how to do it properly. I got my uncle donated a 4-track cassette recorder to me, and I just started figuring out how to use that and started making noise that way, like actual noise with an intention, and I got really sort of wrapped up in that significant explosion of international noise scenes, and particularly the tape trading and cassette and mail aspect of it in the 90s, and was really kind of deep into that for a long time. So the seeds were there in Newcastle, but I didn't actually really embrace it full on until I was living in Glasgow. That's when I started doing that, and then put out a lot of tapes myself, and I know the labels started releasing cassettes by me. Played a few shows, played in Tokyo in 2000. Kenny from Facial Mess set that up.
All right, I didn't know you'd been to Japan with it.
Yeah, long time ago.
Yeah.
Very long time. God, like several lifetimes ago now. Well, Shank toured. The story behind that was Shank toured in Australia, and then on the way
I didn't know that either.
Shank managed to, for a bunch of extremely angry and barely functioning young men, Shank managed to do an awful lot of stuff despite ourselves, despite the environment that we were living in. We toured in Australia. So we went out to Australia for 3 weeks, and then me and the guitarist Jamie, we hung out and had a bit of a vacation there. And then we traveled back via, this brings it back full circle. We went to Japan, and Jonathan was living in Osaka at the time with Shikagi, who he ended up marrying.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to stay with him. But in Tokyo, played a show with Kazumoto Endo, Facial Mass, MSBR, Robo-Chan Man, Gasoline Man, and El Nudo, this hardcore punk band. That was Joshua Norton Cabal. And then I did that for on and off. I sort of stopped doing a lot of noise stuff around the early 2000s. The scene got very annoying to me very quickly. And then I sort of resurrected it a little bit in the late 2000s and then just put it to bed entirely because I felt a bit trapped by the past and I didn't really know what to do with it. So I just decided to kill it off.
Okay.
But the Newcastle connection with the noise scene is, do you know that band Drill that were from?
Oh yeah, Drill.
The Northeast?
Yeah, Kev.
So Drill was interesting. They were like an industrial metal band in what industrial metal meant at the time. So like drum machines and a couple of weird sounds and sort of thrashy guitars. But I think they were a bit different from your average Troponin Pal Godflesh clone kind of band. But they.
Sorry, it's because I know there's more of a like a Bastro like Bitch Magnet influence upon that than like Big Black Pitch Shifter or something.
Yeah, and I remember going to a gig at the Riverside, and I think it was Drill's last performance, and then they became Big Roadbreaker, which was a more industrial kind of thing. So they did this Drill set, and then they did this Big Roadbreaker set. But then Big Roadbreaker, I don't remember what the label was called, but I know they used to trade a lot with like Japanese labels like Alchemy, and then they would sell those releases they traded in Volume Records. I guess Haas from Jazzfinger, there's another connection to you there, would get them in. And so I would buy these like Hijikaidan and Solmania and Merzbau CDs that I think had been traded through Big Roadbreaker into Volume Records. And that really kind of opened my eyes up to the sort of sonic possibilities. And I was looking for that. Like I said, I was going to as a teenager, I was going to a lot of like illegal clubs and stuff. And the thing I liked about the music was the weird sounds. Like I didn't care so much for the doof aspect of it, but I liked the weird noises that were going on in it. And I liked in hip hop like the Bomb Squad and Prince Paul's productions when they put in very non-musical stuff in a musical way, and I was interested in that. And then I listened to a lot of like Throbbing Gristle and Coil and SBK in the early 90s. I discovered that stuff and I was like, no, this is great. I like this. This is what I want. And then noise for me was that sort of fanatical tape trading, tape sharing, mail culture, sending cassettes in the mail that kind of reminded me of like the early days of me being involved in punk. And it was sort of the sonics, it was the ideas that I liked in techno and jungle and some hip hop stuff, but sort of pulled free of that structure and put into like the volume and breaking apart of hardcore that I was into. So fell really deeply in love with that whole noise world for quite a few years there, and still have a lot of time for it. So that's where Joshua Norton Cabal came from. Yeah, and Joshua Norton Cabal was never strictly harsh noise. Like there was elements of that, and that's what I liked and I listened to. But there was always like more weirder sort of surreal moments. Like there was a lot of influences from like I had this King Tubby Yabby You record when I was a teenager that I really liked for the dub parts. When I just smoke a lot of hash and listen to that, and the part where it sounded like the speakers were breaking apart with the infinite repeats on the space echo and the reverb tank being hit. I really like those sounds. So I wasn't trying to mimic those sounds, but those were certainly influencing how I would approach sound. So it wasn't always harsh with Joshua Norton Cabal. There's like some more kind of surreal moments. Not quite ambient, but not super noisy.
Next, after moving to Toronto, is The-Endless-Blockade, which is 2005 to 2011.
I think in Discogs it is. It was Blockade was 2003 to 2010.
Is it? Oh, I was going to say it a bit earlier, right? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I know. Blockade. Our first tour was in 2005. Right. I think that's when our first album came out. First demo came out beginning of 2006, but we played our first gig in 2003.
Right. So that's a pretty quick.
Not long after.
So that's a pretty quick integration into.
Blockade was immediate. I already knew people in Toronto. I'd been coming back and forth a little bit anyway, so I knew people. We got something on the go quite quickly. The first lineup at Endless-Blockade was a 3-piece, didn't last long, because I have this thing where I always think I want to be a singer, and then when I actually am the singer in the band, I absolutely hate it.
Yeah.
So I've done many a band where I've started off as the vocalist, and then as soon as we can get a vocalist, I go, let's get a vocalist. I hate doing this. I really hate being a singer. I like the idea of it though. Blockade. So the original 3-piece lineup was me, Ben Edgar, Yosuke Kiyasu, who plays in this. He's a Japanese guy, plays in Seti Star Set, this weird Japanese noise grind band, and he kind of became a bit of a meme because he did all these tours where he was just going and playing. Have you seen this stuff where he's like playing a snare drum and screaming?
I haven't actually, no. I'm surprised.
There's some podcasts they do on YouTube though, where they keep playing that video and they keep talking about Japanese drum lady, but it's actually Yo, who was the original.
Oh, that possibly rings a bell. Like you mentioned the meme and that, yeah.
Yeah, it's Yo who was the first drummer in the Endless-Blockade. Very, very interesting person. But yeah, that was the first lineup, and then we got Matthew Carroll on vocals. He moved to Toronto from Nova Scotia. So we got Matthew to sing in the band, and then Eric King joined on drums after Yo went back to Japan. So then the lineup was just the four of us until the very end, and then we added Ryan Bloomer to the band on doing like noise with us because we were already doing noise and live, and we wanted to add a fifth person. So Bloomer joined in there because he was a friend of ours. We played a lot of shows with his various industrial and power electronic bands like Piss Horn and then his black metal band Ride at Dawn, and then which is how kind of Intensive Care came to be about a few years later. Like me and Bloomer had not gone back a long way, and he was briefly in the Endless-Blockade at the end as a live member.
Right, from when you move into Toronto and then doing the Endless-Blockade, and then that becomes Column of Heaven is the next.
Kind of. There was a band in between. It didn't last long. So Column of Heaven was towards the end of Endless-Blockade. Me, Eric, and Ben were also doing a death metal band called Slaughter Strike, and we did 2 tapes and a 12-inch in that. And then that band, Blockade, broke up. Then Slaughter Strike broke up not long after that, and then Column of Heaven was basically half of Slaughter Strike and half of the Endless-Blockade doing Column of Heaven, pretty much. We did that for a few years.
So did Slaughter Strike being a death metal band kind of mean that you were like automatically headed in that area for doing Column of Heaven?
I always considered Endless-Blockade a hardcore band, and I always considered Column of Heaven a grindcore band, and I think that probably was a part of it. But yeah, there was more metal in Column of Heaven. It's what made sense at the time, I think.
Yeah. Well, one of them being Integrity, because you do like there's an Integrity cover, which was
we did an Integrity cover. Yeah. We like to surprise. You know what else we did a cover of? But and I think only about 3 people in the world will get this. We covered I Left My Heart in Plainfield by Haters.
Oh, right.
We did that live once. Yeah, we did an Integrity cover. Lots of noise on it. It was a fun version.
How did you end up doing a Haters cover?
Because I really like that record a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were going to do a split with Rotten Hell, and we were talking about putting a cover of an old UK hardcore song on that. We were going to do either going to do Keto, or we were going to do an Ironside cover. Oh, the other one we were thinking of doing was Not Your Fault by Downfall, which was the pre-Bob Tilton band when they sounded, I think they wanted to sound like Born Against. I don't think they did sound like Born Against particularly, though. But yeah, we were talking about covering a bunch of those. Haters, I don't know. It just felt right to do at the time. And we played it live once, and people liked it, but didn't know it was a cover because it's a pretty obscure record to be covering.
Yeah, I mean, how many people in Canada are into like the UK hardcore or like kind of throwback stuff?
Yeah, no one.
No one.
It's funny though. It's fun. Periodically, I'll find like a Stalingrad 10-inch in a local record shop. I'm like, how is there a Stalingrad record here? Oh, actually, you know what? I just moved recently, but until I moved, Richard Corbridge, who was Armed with Anger, he was my next door neighbour.
Was he?
Yeah.
I knew he lived in, or I was aware that he lived in Canada somewhere, but
yeah, he lives in Toronto, just around the corner from where I am now, like literally next door. Like,
so how did that go down when you just kind of saw each other or whatever?
Passed him on the street.
And did you go, "Are you Richard Corbett?"
I said, "I know you don't," and so I know you turn. I'm like going. I was like, "Yeah, Armed with Anger," and he's like, "Oh my god, yeah." It was just, I hadn't seen him in like almost 20 years, probably. He seems to be a happy dad these days. Probably doesn't listen to hardcore anymore.
Let's talk about intensive care, which is okay. Right. Intensive care is what 26 past 5 years.
Yeah, probably.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. It's hard to keep track of time now. I think we've been doing it for 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah.
It's just me. It's me and Ryan Bloomer that was briefly in The-Endless-Blockade. Just a 2-piece, mostly live. It's just bass, drums, and vocals on recording to do some studio trickery. Yeah, I just want to be in a 2-piece. I think I'm at the point in my life now where I can't be in a band anymore. It's just too difficult.
Yeah.
I like playing music and I don't want to stop playing music, but yeah, getting 4 or 5 guys together to get everyone's schedule to match up and get everyone to learn all the stuff is just not really happening at this time for anyone as you get older.
Yeah, I suppose that's like just way more freedom and songwriting, and it's got to streamline things like considerably.
The dynamic is so different, if someone has an issue with something, you find out immediately and you just deal with it. It's not like a band where one person doesn't want to do something but doesn't want to tell anyone, and then it just creates bad feelings, and sides don't start happening in a band that's a 2-piece because it's just the 2 of you, and you can do things like not talk to each other for 6 months because one of you becomes a dad, not me, Ryan. And you can't get together, and it's okay. It doesn't matter. The dynamics of a 2-piece is much more enjoyable to me than the dynamics of a full band. Now, sometimes I think I miss being in a band, but I know I don't. I know that I don't know. There's too much farting around in bands trying to get everyone on the same page, and there's always a point where you're ready to record, but your drummer stops turning up to practices, or you're all ready to record, but your singer has disappeared off the face of the earth, so you don't know if you can have any vocals on the new bloody record. It's just, I don't need that anymore. Yeah. Particularly as I still write a lot of music and still release a lot of music, and it's just easier for me not to have to just deal with other people. Just do it myself now, or do it with a smaller number of people.
Well, you've been doing it like DIY, but this is a band that's like you're working with a larger label now, aren't you? Like a larger hardcore label.
Yeah, we've mostly done it DIY, like releasing our own tapes, and then we've done some stuff with other labels. Iron Lung Records, Iron Lung, band and a label that got some quite deep roots. We're going back to Shank days, so Iron Lung has released a bunch of stuff by us. But the label Closed Casket Activities from New York State, releasing the album. He's done stuff like Gulch and like bands who sell a lot more records in intensive care.
Yeah, it's just like a big hardcore label. It's probably the biggest hardcore label around today, isn't it, I suppose?
Yeah, I think it probably is. But just it's a mostly one-man operation. Justin knows what he's doing. He's very invested in it. He treats his bands fairly. He's been very good to us. He's not under any illusion that we're going to be selling as many records as Gulch, or he manages Full of Hell. He knows we're not going to be doing stuff like Full of Hell. He knows we're not going to be a huge touring act. We're working with them on the new. We've got 2 albums coming out this year. One on Iron Lung, like a more sort of industrial dub kind of sounding album, and then the quote unquote metal record that Closed Casket is putting out. We'll see how that goes. I don't know. I feel like constructs around DIY and the size of labels is fairly meaningless in this day and age now. So I don't know. It seems weird. Like the last tour I ever did, and the only actual full tour that Intensive Care did was with The Body and Uniform and Author and Punisher a couple of years ago. The Body asked us to go out and do that, and I'm like, yeah, let's do it. I didn't actually want to do another small DIY tour again. Like, I didn't want to be doing Intensive Care in the back room of record shops and basements and stuff. It just doesn't appeal to me particularly. So, the last tour I ever did was, playing in like sort of medium-sized clubs and venues, and it was fun doing it that way and staying in hotels most nights.
Yeah.
That was good. So yeah, I don't know. It's different though. The world is a different place now in terms of music, and what the identification of music and genre means is not the same as it was.
Accessing it even.
Exactly. Well, I mean, genre doesn't mean as much as it used to, and if you wanted to be involved in music back in the day. Sorry, I don't want to sound like an old person. I really don't like that sort of golden age old man.
UK 82 man.
Or even just like, we didn't have YouTube or Spotify, and you had to send stamps to get a demo tape, and you might not get it. I remember. I remember too, and I know I've said that publicly before, but you have to stop at some point, because someone who's 25 or younger or even under 35 isn't listening to that with rapt attention, going, "Oh, tell us more about the Stone Age of DIY hardcore." It's like boring. It's the only other people who listen to that and go, "Oh, really?" is like other people in their late 40s are going, "Yes, I remember those days too." But
I'd rather forget.
Yeah. Well, the thing of that is like, on the one hand, it teaches you to, if you stick around, if you don't stick around, it's because it's a lot of work, and people are like, "I'm fed up being in a band now, I don't want to do it anymore." It's because it's a lot of work to do it. But the other side of that is, if you do stick around, you're a bit more hesitant to let go of it. And I'm still very much invested in things. And like, honestly, I haven't listened to a hardcore record in 10 years, really. Like maybe a couple here and there. I don't follow it, but I'd still sort of consider myself a part of that world. But it's only because I've got so much time and effort and money sunk into it over the years that it becomes a part of your character. And I don't think genres and music has the same thing anymore. Like, it's not a part of a person's like social fabric in the same as it used to be. If you wanted to hear new music, you had to know people, you had to talk to people, you had to write letters to people, you had to tape trade, you had to be invested in it. So consequently, like, if you're in the scene, you knew people, because if you didn't know people, you weren't knowing what was going on. And if you were in a band, you couldn't be a grotesque dickhead to everyone. Like, or not everyone in the band could be. You kind of had to, because if you wanted to book gigs, you had to know people, and you had to have people agree to do it and have you stay on their floor. And so, yeah, it's a different world now. You don't have to do that now. So consequently, genre is kind of meaningless. Like, you don't have to sink your entire identity into following a specific type of music. You can hear it anywhere, and consequently, it's like a band like I Hate God is on everyone's radar now, whereas it wouldn't have been back in the day.
Yeah.
And it's not weird to like, Bad Brains and Black Sabbath and Suffocation and like Blood Incantation and Tomb Mold and all that stuff. It's not weird now, because like you gravitate towards people that look the same as you. And when you live in Newcastle in the early 90s, it was an incredibly, incredibly violent place. Like, living in Newcastle hardened me up significantly. I mean, living in Leeds before that in the 80s did, but like Newcastle really sealed it, because I wasn't living at home anymore. And you got protection by being around other people who were like you. And part of being in genres was because you would be around other people who looked like you and acted like you and thought, and had not thought the same way, but had a shared understanding of value systems that matched with yours, and you were less of a threat. You were the world was less of a threat to you. You're less of a target. And like me and Jonathan Shaw from Ebola, like we lived together. We lived in the West End. It was not a fun time. Really felt like you were under siege, and the two of us were out though. Like people didn't fuck with us. Like he was a kind of crazy person as well at the time, and I definitely used that as security a lot. But yeah, you don't need that anymore, and I think that's okay. I'm definitely not someone who reminisces about the golden days and wishes they were still here, because a lot of that stuff was for safety, and I think it's good that younger people don't have to fear getting kicked to death leaving the house because they've got like green hair or a tattoo, which it was like living in Newcastle at the time. Like it was terrifying. Used to go to bars in the town centre or like clubs, and they'd ask you to roll up your sleeves if you had any tattoos, and if you had tattoos, you couldn't get into the venue. And that was it. You'd roll up your sleeves. Like you wouldn't see that anywhere now. Like
everyone's got fucking tattoos, full sleeves, you know.
Yeah, but you'd go on, like not even like hidden ones. They would roll up your sleeves and if they found one on your shoulder, you weren't getting into a bar because they didn't want you in.
Yeah.
So consequently, people, it's that time-old story of people making their own parallel institutions. So people make their own autonomous venues and squats. They make their own distribution networks. They make their own ways of doing things because they can't do them in any other ways. And that's something that's been going on for decades before punk came around, and is happening more and more now. And my interest in DIY is less about the music that is created specifically within that social milieu, but like the actual social milieu itself, like the ideas of cooperation and mutual aid and social relations is kind of what still keeps me around. The music itself is, I think, that important now. Like I understand it was the glue that got us all there back in the day. But in the 90s, the music was the end product, and we talk about the music as the end product, but what we don't talk about as much is how much bloody work went on the back end for being able to go and hang out with someone at the Cumberland Arms and see Hard to Swallow and Underclass and Ebola on a Saturday night.
Mm-hmm.
How many conversations had to happen then? How many, how the records got made and distributed, and what the networks were there, and what shoulders we were standing on to get that done. We talk about the bands, but that backing to it all was the real hard work. And that's why Ebola was really close with the people who did Slamp, like Pete and Rachel.
Yeah.
And then Pussycat Trash, so like Rosie and Simon as well in that band, because they were doing exactly the same thing that we were doing. Like it didn't sound like it, and I think we got that instinctively, that these were people who were their goals were the same as ours. They wanted a better world, and they wanted to practice different ways of organizing, different ways of economics, and was setting something up. Their bands did not sound like our bands, and I kind of didn't really like a lot of them at first, but as my involvement with Slamped went on, I used to do the door a lot of their gigs for them. I actually really liked a lot of that stuff, and I really like it now. But yeah, their goals were the same as ours were. Like they really were. They just didn't sound the same. Like it was less chest beating, posturing, angry young man kind of stuff. But it was the same thing.
Okay, yeah. Well, just to switch a bit here, is like you've run the Survivalist label for that must be like 10 years or so, and just how you've seen that.
Yeah.
Well, you must have witnessed the the physical to digital, like the distribution, the what thought you have to put behind it now.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I've always released my own music, and that doesn't make me particularly unusual or special. And I'm sure that everyone that you're talking to on this podcast has a history of putting out their own tapes and CDs and records and all that kind of stuff, and booking their own things. It's just what we do. Survivalist has been the name that my very occasional tape label has had for like the last since about 2008, I think. There's a lot of stuff that's not on Discogs because I didn't even write Survivalist on most of the early releases. The whole point with Survivalist though was, and this is why it's not really tenable anymore, is because I wanted to just sell releases on tour and at gigs that we were playing, so you could only get them by an actual interaction with a person. I never did mail order with Survivors, never have, never will, for multiple reasons. I can't face the punishment that comes with mail order, and if you must have the patience of a saint in this era to be dealing with people asking questions and blaming you for postage prices. Now, so the whole point of Survivalist was like, well, you have to come to the show and you have to buy it off us at the merch table. And with physical stuff, people would always talk about different variant records, and certainly in the 2000s, like variant sleeves and different colored vinyl really came up as a big thing. And my way of thinking about that was always, it gets harder and harder to sell your own music when you're on tour. So what you need to do is you need to force the hand of the consumer. So you have to say, well, you could buy this record from someone else after the show, that's fine. But if you buy this version, you won't see it again, and you can only get it from us. And it comes with a different sleeve and all that kind of stuff. So it's a way of like, people have that fear of missing out thing, right? So it's a way of feeding into that, but at the same way saying, no, you do need to actually give money to the people whose music you enjoy, because just getting the $5 door price at this basement show is not really going to cover very much for us. So that's kind of how Survivalist was in terms of like seeing sales decline. I think the real sort of decline I noticed was that the change between like the start of Column of Heaven and the end of Column of Heaven, and then with pressing plant turnaround times from the end of Column of Heaven to the start of intensive care, just really noticing that pressing plants take so long now to release stuff. Like we've got these 2 records that are coming out this year in intensive care. It's just, they're going to take a long time. Like the days of getting a test press within a week and then getting your vinyl back within 2 weeks of that, so a 3-week turnaround essentially from finishing your stuff, is so gone right now. Like you don't do that now. You can't. It takes 6 months because pressing plants are so backed up because there's so few pressing plants now.
There's just saturation as well, isn't it? Like amount of people who think it's cool.
Pierre Bourdieu wrote about this in the field of cultural production back in the early 80s about how culture is produced and how there's 2 different levels. There's the field of mass production, which is popular culture, and there's a field of restricted production, which speaks to and I'd recommend anyone with interest in DIY reads that book, The Field of Cultural Production by Pierre Bourdieu, and he talks about these 2 different fields. And one of the things he talks about quite clearly is how the field of restricted production, which is the life that you and I have been involved in, and everyone else on your podcast, it's almost like the economic world reversed. And you can certainly see this in the 90s. Like making money is actually frowned upon, and it's about artistic merit, but there's not much. The rewards that are attached to being in that field. The capital is not economic. It's not financial capital. It's not economic capital. It's different. There's different kinds of social capital and cultural capital. But then you can see that in the field of mass production, in order to renew it, it's about money, but it's not. It doesn't receive accolades. And the way that the field of mass production renews itself is to borrow from the field of restricted production. And what's been happening right now is that major label world has seen, oh yeah, vinyl's cool, so we're going to start pressing vinyl again. So they, it's glutted up the pressing plants with endless Bruce Springsteen and Fleetwood Mac reissues for Record Store Day, because they weren't using the plants for a couple of decades, so that less and less plants were around, pressing plants, and they were only being used by people pressing them like dance music, and I think dance music and punk and some metal records was what was keeping vinyl afloat for a long time, so that the manufacturing sector shrunk significantly. But now that the field of mass production and major labels and Record Store Day are interested in, again, it creates a glut of things, and you can see that in lots of things. You can see that in when Lady Gaga was wearing like a Gizm thing on the back of her leather jacket. Again, it's like the field of mass production renewing itself via borrowing from the field of restricted production. Pierre Bourdieu, French sociologist. Once I read that stuff, I stopped having circular arguments about DIY with people, because like, oh, this French intellectual beat this to death in a way that makes perfect sense years before I was even involved in this. So
yeah, coming full circle from what you mentioned at the beginning with like pirate radio and hip hop, is like Wolfagram now, which is production, hip hop production.
So I produce hip hop under the name of Wolfagram now, and have done for a couple of years now. Like I said, I'm not interested in touring really anymore. I'm not really interested in playing live at all anymore. I got to say, it doesn't. I just don't even want to see live music most of the time anymore. Just kind of past that in my life now.
Yeah.
But I still very much invested in making music, and I'm invested in those social relationships with people. And this is a bit of an aside right now, but I think I do find it sort of sad is the wrong word, but it's odd as you grow older. Like I'm 47 now, and I've spent my entire adult life touring and being a musician in Europe, and in particular North America. Like I did a lot of tours in the 2000, and consequently because of that, most of my significant friendships and relationships are with people across the globe, because they're through music and they're through touring, and it is kind of hard to slow down that side of things, but it means you don't see your social group so much anymore, because most of my really close friends are people who live in like Seattle and San Francisco and Maryland and those kind of places, and Texas, so you don't see them as much. But yeah, so Wolfagram, I don't want to stop doing music. Like music is what I do. I love doing it. I love music, and I love the culture of music. I just don't really want to tour anymore. It's tiring. I can't do it anymore, physically and mentally. And I'm not that interested in every band that comes around now. I'm still very interested in music, but I have to pick it personally. So still want to make music. So I figured that a way to do it was I was always making electronic music. I've been recording myself. I recorded all the Colin Heaven intensive care releases myself, because I taught myself to record about 10 or 12 years ago. Just learned by doing it. But one of the things I would always do when testing.
Sorry, was this recording in like a full-on studio setting, or just more?
No, this is learning to record a full band, but. So obviously I've always done home recording, like with noise stuff, but like, okay, how do I actually mic up a full drum kit though? How do I actually stick a microphone on a guitar cabinet? How do I do this stuff properly? And trial and error.
Yeah, cool.
Figuring it out. So I don't think you need to be in a full studio. Like if you want to go in a full studio, that's fine, and there's a place for that. But I don't think you need to be in a full studio.
I don't think so. No.
No, well, I don't think you ever have needed to. I think it depends what kind of thing you're doing. The music I'm interested in, like I'm very interested in home recording and DIY production jobs.
Yeah.
I think it creates interesting things, and I think in the current era, there's no excuse not to do your own, really go deep into your own interest in music. Like there's no money to be made in music at this level. There never was, but there's definitely no money to be made on this level now, and you don't have to go into a studio now. So you're not at the mercy of some like stupid old hippie who doesn't know what you're referencing. You don't need to go and give that person your money. You can buy a setup. The setup I have been using for the last like 10 years, and I've recorded so many albums that have been released on it. And the setup cost me what one studio visit would have cost me, and I've got so much use out of it. So no, I'm really interested. Like I'm really fascinated with home recording. I love home recording processes, and I think it necessarily alters the process of writing and how music comes out as when it's recorded at home. And I like that. That's not to say I say no one should record in studios. I think they should, and I think that different things happen when you record in studios. But I do think there is something quite specific about home recording, and I'm very, very interested in it. And we'll happily talk for hours about home recording with people who also do it.
Well, I think what you're saying is just using your ears and your intuition, because it's probably right, isn't it?
Well, using what you've got, not just using your ears and your intuition. And sometimes, so the reason I got into home recording is because I got sick of paying someone money to do a bad job of what I was doing, and I decided a long time ago that if someone was not going to do justice to my end product, that fault should lie with me. I don't want the end product to not be good because someone who I paid to mix it did a shitty job of it. Like I think that's a bad excuse. Like if I'm unhappy with the end product, it has to be because of my fault and my own failings. So everything, I don't record perfect things, but nothing has ever been perfect. I've recorded, like, everything I've done in the studio, I've got problems with it. And I'm much happier with my own stuff because I know what the faults are. And it's like, well, I can live with it. Like, I know it sounds like a wall of crap. Some of those, certainly that first Column Heaven album is really blown out sounding, but I like it. It adds to the sort of ferocity of it, I think, that we wouldn't have captured in the studio. But no, I've always been, DIY has been about self-sufficiency and about skill sharing to me, and home recording is one of those things. Like, and I'm definitely very happy to talk to younger bands about how to record themselves, and people ask me, say, how do I stick a mic on a kick drum? And I'm like, well, this is what I have found works for me. And yeah, it's like using your ears and your instincts, but also using what you've got. Like, I don't have a perfectly treated soundproof room to record in for intensive care, but fuck it, you just do it anyway. When we were tracking the album, there was a reggaeton sound system playing in the room next door that was like just so goddamn loud, but you just have to deal with it. I don't know, I kind of like that sound of things, but yeah, the hip hop stuff came around because I love hip hop and always have. It was what I was listening to as a kid. But I got way back into it a few years ago, and because I record at home a lot and home recording stuff. If I was testing new equipment, I couldn't just I couldn't call someone over and say, hey, set up your drum kit and let me test this stuff, and I'd have to do something else. So I'd be making like electronic music and learning how to mix that. And eventually I just thought, I wonder if I could actually do this. So I spent a couple of years privately. Yeah, so I started like doing a lot of hip hop stuff, and now I work with mostly try and work with local rappers in Toronto, because I think the underground scene in Toronto is stronger than it is anywhere else in the world currently. So I try and mostly work with local people here, but produce a bunch of different albums for people, and we'll continue to produce albums. And it's a good way of still doing music and being involved in music and being very active in it, but without having to go on tour for 2 weeks at a time to promote a new record, because I can't do that anymore. But I don't want to give up doing music. So production and collaborations are kind of my way forward these days.
Okay. Well, my thoughts behind doing this, or doing this series, or doing one even or more, was to kind of find out why people, or how people did what they were doing, or kept on doing what they were doing. And I kind of, I've answered my own question, because, I've done more than one of them now, and they keep happening, and there's a reason, because it's just in you, isn't it? I suppose there's some inspiration.
I mean, you're someone I know because, let's not edit. I think this is important to put in your podcast, and I think you talking about yourself was important, so let's not edit this part out.
Okay.
But you're someone that's on my radar because I know you through music, and because you came around at a time, and you probably don't know this, but you did sort of, you and your social circle kicked things up a little bit. I've got a friend in Newcastle who I'm sure even now would refer to you and your crew, like Woodcock and everyone, as the Little Uns.
Oh yeah.
She would always, like Joanne, she would call you the Little Uns, and you're a friggin' middle-aged man now.
Yeah.
But
I was 18 at the time.
Yeah. But
teenagers.
You came around at a time when things was, and I think things go in these like waves of stagnation. I think we were hitting another wave of stagnation. These cycle through constantly, and you guys came around in Oran de Forest, and really, it felt like you came out of nowhere. By which I mean you weren't beholden to social networks that pre-existed. And I think that's very important, is to not always be beholden to the old people that are around. And you kind of kicked things up a bit, and you were doing weird stuff. and you would switch your instruments, and your shows were chaotic, and it was just like, what the hell is this? This is amazing. I love this. And you did a split album with Jazz Finger, who was like a weird experimental thing. Yeah, and I remember seeing you guys live once, and Rob was singing, and he had his mic set up, and he had a 4-track in front of him and was doing like live noise stuff at the time. And like, people were not doing that then. They're doing it now. But people were not doing that then, and it was very interesting to see that. And I was like, this is a good mixture of my two main interests right now, which is harsh noise and punk. Art de Farce was interesting, and then the stuff you did with Marzaran again, which to me, I know it wasn't the same people, but it felt like it was coming from the same place with some of the same people involved in it.
I think so.
And I don't know. I think you're. I think you had authentic reasons for doing it, which was you just wanted to do it, and it was an expansion of your social life anyway, in a way of making new connections and doing things differently. And you're doing. I know that you do. I know that you're doing some music again now.
Yeah.
But like the podcast, it's a way of keep on doing things. And I say I don't look down on people certainly from my past who don't do music anymore. I really don't, because I understand why you wouldn't do it now. But for a person like myself, it's like I can't imagine, like I can't not exist in the world and not be a creative person. Like it's I don't have it in me. Like I have to be doing something. Like I'm recording this podcast from my second bedroom in the house, which is like a small mixing studio. Like I'm sitting at my beat machines, and I've got like a table of pedals and synthesizers to my right here. And the podcast is, again, it's like an evolution of your past. It's still about information.
It's like a zine. To me, it's like a zine.
It is.
It's like a zine.
It's exactly like a zine. And I think DIY, I said this already in this, but we focus on the cultural outputs, by which we mean the bands and sometimes the zines, and sometimes, but not often, the venues. Like, we might think about the 1 at 12 Club, or we might think about Gilman Street, but rarely will we think about 121 Rats in Leeds, or or even like the Broken Doll in Newcastle. It's not a punk venue, but we don't think about those things. But to me, DIY was about communication. It was about communicating an idea, and it was about social networks. It wasn't just that end product, because focusing on the end product does not speak to the amount of energy that goes into that end result. So I think podcasting is the new zine.
I don't know. It seemed like a good idea. It seemed like a good idea.
Meaning everyone ignores it, and it's full of weird men trying to get you interested in their podcast, but no one wants it.
I mean, this whole thing is, it's just like, it's there, or if you want it, if you listen to it and you don't like it, then who gives a fuck, really? You're not buying it, so it's it's just there.
And no one owes you anything.
Yeah, it's just there, and like I'm floating to the background, and just kind of, it's more like curation, really.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of deciding.
Yeah. Well, and curation was a very big piece of DIY and labels, and in the streaming era, it doesn't matter so much anymore. Like you don't necessarily know a label. Sometimes you do, but you don't usually know a label that's curated a thing. Like you would, like Flat Earth. You knew what you were getting roughly when you bought a record on Flat Earth, Around with Anger, or Good Life Records in Europe. Like you knew what you were getting. And certain noise labels like Freak Animal, Unrest Productions, that kind of stuff, and that has kind of fallen by the wayside now. Like the role of label or zine maker as curator is not relevant anymore in the digital age. But I think the role of podcaster as curator is something that is relevant and is important now. do people choose the track at the end of the?
Sometimes, yeah. I say, do you want to?
So okay,
do you want to choose a
when
track,
Nick,
or some people don't give a fuck? Just whatever.
okay, so the reason why I asked this is because at the end of the one you did with Nick Loring, you picked one off the split 7-inch with Servitude. I don't remember what song it was. It might have been "Bring Me the Head of Mike Brunson," which was
the one,
which was Nick's song. Like that was his concept and lyric. Yeah.
All right. Pretty cool.
Yeah, that was Nick's song. Like he, because it was on that Another State of Mind documentary. Mike Brunson is the complaining roadie on it, and I don't remember where Nick's head was entirely with this, but he had this quite compelling idea of Mike Brinson being like a sort of a cipher for a sigil for like all that's wrong and complaining and stuff. So that's kind of where that was, and I like that. So did Nick pick that song, or did you?
No, I picked it because it was. All right. It was tiny.
So the reason I asked, the reason I ask about that, and this is why I don't think this should be edited out, is because for years, in Ebola I played on. We didn't do that much music, but I'm on the album 7-inch, and then the split 7-inch with Servitude was the last thing I did, and I think there's a couple of comp songs here and there as well. But I always thought that the split 7-inch with Servitude, I didn't think it held up. I thought it was too noisy. I thought it just sounded bad. I didn't think it was recorded very well. And hey, this ties in with episode 9 with Che, because we recorded that with Mark Simpson.
Well, that's why I was put it on. There was a sort of mention. He was mentioned in the conversation with Nick.
And Shank recorded our early everything before the album with Mark Sims. And recorded the album in a lockup with a guy from Edinburgh, and then we did and Brendan from Teenage Fan Club recorded our last thing, the split album with Iron Lung. But I didn't. It's fun. Like we recorded that, I was like, I don't know about this. Like, and it was the last thing I did with that band. And I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. And then I hadn't listened to it in years. And then I heard that song at the end of the podcast you did with Nick, and I was like, that sounds different from how I remember it. And I went back and I listened to that side of the record. I was like, no, actually, this sounds really good now. And I think the earlier Ebola stuff to my ears now kind of sounds dated, by which I mean it's a product of its times. Like I think the 7-inch still sounds good. The album I'm a bit tepid on sometimes. But that split 7-inch with Servitude, I think sounds really good. And I think the reason it sounds really good is it sounds so completely unhinged. Like it's so noisy, it's so blown out. It's too fast. Like we're playing too fast. You can hear that we are struggling to keep up with each other. There's so much distortion on everything. The vocals are all blown out. Like we've got like harsh noise going on between the songs. But I think it sounds good now, because I think we're in a time now, we've got bands like, Full of Hell, who are good friends of mine and claim an influence from some of the stuff I've done in the past, which is, nice to say that publicly. And like all that whole war metal stuff, like the really noisy sort of death black metal stuff, that's very fast and lots of drum rolls and just like blown out. And that's a standard now that I think people accept. And I listened to that Servitude split. This is a really long way of saying I think it sounds way better than I thought it did. And I actually think 25 years later, that record holds up way better than the other ones did, because it's so blown up and destroyed sounding. It just sounds so absolutely violent sounding now, which wasn't really what we were going for. But so I wondered if Nick had picked that song, or if you had.
Nah, me, I was just fucking into it,
And I think, I don't know, I really like that material now.
Yeah.
I really like that material.
Well, you're changed your mind.
And I played it to a couple of people. I was like, hey, have you heard this band I did 25 years ago? And they're like, good Lord, that does not sound like a band from 25 years ago. That sounds like what bands sound like now when they're really going for that stuff. Now, when they're trying to out-brutal each other now, they kind of sound like that. So,
well, I don't know. I've changed your mind on your own band.
Yeah, don't edit that out. I think that's important to keep that in.